Hey guys, welcome back to another Big Al Devlin video, and today I'm filming for you a continuation of our Gods of the North series that we have here, which is part of our paganistic series that we have here on the House of Devlin on YouTube. Now, Celtic God will be the prominent expert of the subject of today's concern, and that is the god Tyr. Okay, God Tyr is the king of gods amongst Celtic paganism. So I am a Nordic pagan, he's a Celtic pagan. He will have a lot more stories and a lot more information to tell you on this god than myself. And so I direct you to him really for expert information. However, Tyr did exist within the Nordic pantheon, and I hope Celtic God you have more stories and more information to give on Tyr than what I have learnt from Nordic paganism, because Tyr really is a god that I respect. Reading up more upon him, I always respected him. I always had a love for him. He's of my pantheon, but having read what he did and read what he's about, really just makes me want to shake his hand and say, you are one fine God. You'll get this. You'll get the joke later, guys. I do not mean to mock a god. I do not mean to mock a god, but you'll get the joke later about the shaking of the hand. But honestly, Tyr really is. Honestly, to me, he upholds to the qualities that I, as a man, uphold to the highest of standards. To me, there are the two highest standards. There are two qualities that a person must possess to be considered really valuable in my life. Loyalty. This is, to me, the highest value that a person can have, followed equally by, not even underneath, equally by courage. A person must be brave. A person must not fear anything. And ultimately, a person must not fear self-sacrifice. If it is deemed necessary, they must sacrifice themselves for the greater good, so to speak. Ultimately, that's why I reacted as well as I did 2 years ago during my car crash. When I saw death was coming, I had a second or two to react. I didn't panic, because to me, courage is seeing death is inevitable but still fighting to the very end. And my last few seconds spent on this earth before I died was trying to protect my girlfriend and prevent her from being harmed by the truck, like myself, that was about to hurt us and kill me. Okay, and so for me, loyalty and courage are by far the two highest things qualities that a man can possess, but they're also the two highest qualities that a god can possess in many respects. And Tyr possesses these in the most ample amounts. There is no doubt in my mind, and I'm sure Celtic God will agree with me on this, that Tyr is the bravest and the most courageous of all the gods. There's no doubt about that. There's a lot of bravery amongst the Nordic gods. There's no shortage of it. Courage is something that is found in ample amounts, but Tyr has it more than any other. And I respect that. Okay, I respect that so much. And that's all I can really say. I found a new love for a God that I knew of but didn't fully understand. Okay, and so I would say that in this video that I'm not going to be following the same format as I have the other videos, like I have for Freya and Odin. The reason as such is because there's not that much information on Tyr in Nordic paganism. That I can't tell you of him as like the god of war, as the god of courage, the god of bravery, the god of justice, the god of this, the god of that, because really there's no mentioning of any stories. In fact, there's only one story that involves Tyr in Nordic paganism, and I will tell you that story in full here in respect to the god instead. That's what I'll do. I will tell you the story of Tyr that he's famous for amongst Nordic pagans. Okay, but before I get to that story, I wish to read some other words dedicated to him that I found on various sites and books, because I believe they sum up the god very much to the highest degree. They give you a more rounded knowledge from a Nordic perspective still, but a much more rounded knowledge still nonetheless. And I hope that if you wish to learn more about the god, that Celtic God will be able to take you on further and teach you more about him. Okay, because this will be the limit of where I can teach you, because there is no more information for me to give. This is all there is out there on Tyr. And I would like to start by almost dedicating this as a shrine to Tyr. Okay, so imagine we're in a shrine, okay, at the moment, dedicated to Tyr himself, and I'm one of his servants, if you wish. Welcome to the shrine of Tyr, the Lord of Swords and the God of Honour. Welcome to the home of the one-handed God who does what is necessary even to his own pain and detriment. Welcome to a place of justice, even if it is a harsh justice. Welcome under crossed swords to the home of the soldier who braves all so that some may still live. You see, Nords, like, I'm a Nordic pagan, so I may be a Nord, you could describe me as a Nord, even though I'm not from Scandinavia, they learn their religion, they learn or teach their religion in the form typically of poetry. And so this is why I'm reading these poems to you before we get onto the story of Tyr, because what you must do is read, not listen just to the words that I'm reading to you. Go back and listen to that poem again, or that dedication again. But listen in between the words, and in between the lines, and listen to the hidden meanings. Listen to the love and the dedication of whoever wrote that. Listen and hear it, and you can hear the true meaning of what the god Tyr means to the Nordic people. Even though there is minimal information still that survives to today, there would have been more information, more tales, more stories that existed 1,000 years ago during the golden age for Vikings, for example. There would have been stories that were told of Tyr and his courage and his bravery, but we just don't have them now. So all I can do is just read you some of the poems that exist and hope that you can see there was a love for this god. There was a respect for this god, because like myself, the Vikings, the Nords, they respected courage, they respected strength, they respected being on the battlefield, knowing that the man to the side of you and the other man to the side of you will not run. They will stand and they will fight and they will die if needs be next to your side to make sure that you live if needs be. They will sacrifice their own life to see that you live and the battle is won. And that is what Tyr is all about, okay? Once you start getting that warrior's mentality, that was very much of, in the Nordic mentality, for example, of the Celtic mentality also. Once you start learning and to see through the eyes of a warrior, for me it was very easy. I was trained to fight from a young age, but it doesn't make me a warrior. What does it mean to be a warrior? That's in a whole different video. But because I've already see through the eyes of a warrior, I understand this God, and I've fallen in love with him. I want to read you, and I've read to you before, this poem that was written by Alan Carruthers, okay, and I want to read it to you again because it's a beautiful poem, and I want you to just listen to the words and listen in between the words and in between the lines, as I say, because this is how a Nord now teaches. I'm teaching you in the Nordic fashion, the way a religion is taught traditionally now. Okay, in my previous videos I've simply just read out notes, I've told you things. Well, this is how a Nord of old would have taught his religion, okay, and would have taught his sons or his brothers or his those who he fights amongst with even, okay. This is how he would have taught his religion, okay. And so listen to this poem here, and then finally I will tell you one extra fact about Tyr before then going on to the story of Tyr and how he lost his hand, okay. Steel rings on steel, clouds glow red in the sunset. A single ray shines down at the end of the day, at the end of the battle amidst all the blood. The sun dyes the field as red as it already is. Prepare us, Lord of Swords, for the daily battle and for the unforeseen. Okay, I promised you a fact. Enough poetry. You may be bored, you may have fucked off, I don't know. But this is the proper Nordic way of learning about your gods. So I hope if you are a Nordic pagan, even if you don't like poetry, I hope you can at least appreciate the beauty that can come from such things, and how you can express your love and dedication to a god through poetry far strongly than you can by simple words alone. Okay? Essentially, poetry is a way of expressing your soul. That's one way of looking at it. Okay? And I think that's why the Nords told their stories as and told their taught their religion in the form of poetry, because it's so expressive. Okay? Now, if you went into battle, obviously, typically you would build your own weapons. Most Vikings were capable, or most Nordic people were capable of building their own weapons, but especially Vikings. Vikings were the martial elite, remember, of the Nordic society, were capable of at least repairing weapons. They may not have been blacksmiths, but they could certainly replace a shaft on an axe, for example, or a spear. Okay, they may not have been able to forge the iron, but they could have easily replaced the shaft. I've done it myself, it's not that hard. Okay, and upon that shaft, or within the steel itself, if you've talked to the smith or you're a smith yourself, you may dedicate a weapon to Tyr. And to do that, you'd put in the symbol of Tyriz, which is just a T, essentially. I think have I got one on me? I haven't got the symbol on me, okay? But it's basically, I can't even think of a rune to show you that looks like it, but it basically looks like a T, but with slanted down bits rather than a straight bit, a capital T, okay? And if you were to put that into your weapon, what it does, it dedicates that weapon to Tyr, okay? And it will strengthen the outcome of the battle into your favour. It doesn't mean that you're going to win the battle, it doesn't mean that you're going to survive the battle, but it will give you one, the patronage of a war god, because Tyr was a god of war, but it will also be put upon your weapon for a single purpose, really, more than anything else, more to represent the justice that Tyr represented, the courage that he represented. It would instill you with bravery And if you were committing, for example, in that battle, you were an avenging a wrong that had been committed against your family. Say you were going into a duel, you would have tiras put on your sword, for example, because if you were avenging a wrong that one of your family had been murdered and you were going to kill the killer in a trial by combat, for example, then I would have tiras put on my sword simply because judgment at this point must be dished out upon the murderer, and tiras would make the sword better at doing so. It would bring Tyr's power into the sword almost, and allow it to give the judgment that the murderer, of course, deserved. And so finally, we finish this video, and I do apologise to those who expected more. More like the format that I've been doing, like hour and a half videos on the gods, where I talk about the different aspects and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, I can't do it here because there is, as I say, only one story and one story alone that survived with him in it from a Nordic perspective. And it involves Fenrir. Okay, so Loki had 3 children by his mistress, who was a giantess called Angrboda. Okay, which means she who bodes angerish. Okay, the 3 children that he had were given birth in Asgard. Were called Jormungand, and that was the first and the eldest. This was cast aside by Odin himself and thrown into the oceans of Midgard. It grew too quickly and it was monstrous to behold. And within the oceans of Midgard, it grew and grew and grew until it filled the ocean itself and he could bite his own tail. We all know who Jormungand is. He is the one who actually initiates a Ragnarok. Doesn't bring Ragnarok on, but when he comes out of the sea and poisons the sky, that's the first act within Ragnarok. That's when Ragnarok is occurring. The second was a death goddess called Hel. And she was thrown again from Asgard. I believe it was by Odin. Although I can't tell you that for certain, but she was cast aside out of Asgard, as I say, I believe by Odin, and she landed in a realm called Helheim, and that's where she took her name, Hel. Okay, so she took her name and named herself after the realm that she landed within, and half of her was a beautiful maiden, but the other half of her, to split down the middle, was a rotting corpse. So she made quite a good death goddess in that sense. And then there was a third and final offspring between the mating between Loki and Angrboda. Okay, and that was Fenrir. Now Fenrir was a wolf. Okay, he was born in the form of a wolf. Or should I say almost like a werewolf, like you kind of see in the horror movies, except without any human bit whatsoever. Like when he was permanently in wolf form, okay, but he had the intelligence of a human. He wasn't a wolf. He was still a god. He still understood what was going around him. He may have been a monster, but he was not stupid. Okay, he was just very barbaric and very brutish and very animalistic in nature, and the gods feared him. The gods of Asgard feared him, especially as he grew at an alarming rate. They believed that he would bring about some terrible ordeal. And of course this was before Odin gained his ability of foresight and saw that Fenrir was the one who would kill him. Okay, so at this point they didn't know that Fenrir was the god who would kill Odin. But the only god out of all the Asgardians that was brave enough and honourable enough, more to the point, who dared to approach Fenrir and feed him was Tyr. Tyr actually fed Fenrir, stopped him starving to death. He saw it as simply upholding the law and honour to feed the beast. It doesn't matter that he's scary, it doesn't matter that he's potentially very dangerous, he still must be fed. And so Tyr actually had the courage to feed Fenrir. And as Fenrir was fed, as I say, he grew and grew and grew. And the gods came to fear him more and more and more. And so they said to him, basically they tried to trick him. They attempted to bind him with a variety of different chains. And every time they did it, they said to him, they got his consent by telling him that they were simply testing the wolf's strength. They wanted to see whether he could break his way out of the chains. And every time that he did break out of the chains, whatever type of metal they used, steel, gold, some kind of godlike steel that like Mjolnir was made of, whatever, it didn't matter. He always broke his way out. And every time he broke his way out of the chains, the gods would all clap and secretly they'd be crapping themselves. But they would clap and cheer and every time he broke free, he was presented with another stronger, thicker chain. But the gods obviously understood that no normal metal would bind Fenrir. He was too powerful, too strong, and he was getting stronger and stronger. And so they sent a messenger down to Svartalheim, which was the realm of the dwarfs. The dwarfs being the most skilled and skillful craftsmen within the entire cosmos. They built Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor. I believe they built the spear of Odin. They built the necklace that Freya wore around her neck. They built remarkable things. Okay, and they were asked to forge a chain whose strength could not be equalled. It could never be broken. And so they agreed. They agreed on whatever terms it was. The terms were never defined, or at least I've not been able to define the terms. Because the dwarfs they did stuff, they built things, but they always asked for things in return. But I don't know what they asked for in return to this. But they created the chains out of the following things. It's quite interesting. They forged the chains out of cat's footsteps, the beard of a woman, and the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish, sorry, that's my list, and the spittle of a bird. Basically, in other words, they forged a chain out of things that don't exist. And therefore, futile to struggle against. They forged a chain out of things that don't exist. So that way it could not be broken. You can't break what does not exist. And the chain was named Gleipnir, which means open. And that was what it was named. Well, the gods presented Fenrir with this very curiously light and supple chain. It wasn't thick and heavy like the other chains that they'd been, got the wolf used to at this point. And the wolf, as I say, wasn't stupid. Fenrir was not a stupid animal. He was a god. He was the son of Loki. He had a mind. And he suspected trickery and refused to be bound by the chain that had been presented to him. The only way that he would do it is with a pledge of good faith. And that pledge of good faith would be that a god, any god, must lay his or her hand in his jaw during the entire time that he's chained to the rock by the chain in question. Now, of course, none of the gods agreed because they knew that this chain was unbreakable. And when Fenrir found that out, that he would chomp down and bite their hand off. The only person who stood up was brave Tyr himself. For the good of all life, he volunteered to fulfill the wolf's demand, knowing full well that he would lose his hand. He cared not. But he did care. He didn't want to lose his hand. But it was for the good of all life. He knew that Fenrir had to be bound, and so he was willing to sacrifice his hand to achieve this goal. And sure enough, when Fenrir discovered that the chain itself was unbreakable, as it was, dwarven forged and all the rest of it, and that he was unable to escape from Gleipnir, that's the name of the chain, he chomped off and swallowed Tyr's hand. The beast was then transported to some lonely and desolate place, and the chain was tied to a boulder, and a sword was placed in the wolf's jaws to hold them open. As he howled wildly and ceaselessly, a foamy river called Expectation flowed from his drooling mouth, and there in his sordid state he remained until Ragnarok came. So really, as I say, this is the only myth that we have of Tyr, but I think it shows his character perfectly. Not only as a soldier, I mean, we know that he was a war god. He was a god of war. But he was much more than simply a god of war. Instead, the myth or the story itself illustrates Tyr's role as the divine legal expert and upholder of the law, the upholder of what must be done. And he sacrifices his hand, and when he does so, not only does he procure the salvation of the gods, but he also regularizes it. He renders legal that which without him would have been pure fraud. Basically, the gods tricked Fenrir, and the only way to make that what they did anything less than fraudulent was for them a sacrifice to be made. And he sacrificed his hand so that the binding of Fenrir, the trickery of Fenrir being bound to the stone, was now legal. It was a legal act. It wasn't trickery as such, because he kept his hand in that beast's mouth. Even he probably had a chance to remove it, but he kept his hand in there, and he allowed the wolf to take his hand, so that the actions that the other gods had taken, it wasn't him who bound the wolf to the stone, but he knew that he needed to be bound and hidden away. But by sacrificing his hand, he justified what the other gods did. It no longer was trickery, it was now law, because sacrifices were made to make it law, to turn it from trickery to law. Do you understand? I hope I get the point across. That is why Tyr is so brave, and not only brave, but as I say, an uphold. That's why he's the god of justice. He upholds the law even at self-sacrifice, and he will commit self-sacrifice to make whatever it needs to be done legal in the eyes of the law, essentially, of the law of the gods. And so with that, I will finish, and I hope God of War, God of War, Celtic God, enjoyed that particularly, because that is the Nordic story, and I hope he enjoyed the poems, the Nordic poems on Tyr, because I wanted to show respect to Tyr, as I say. I wanted to show him the respect he deserves, the respect he doesn't necessarily get within Nordic paganism, because simply his tales have been lost over time. Let's hope we can find them. Let's hope somewhere there's a chest full of them, and we may learn more about this god. But for now, that is all I can say. Thank you. I've been Big Al.